For the bodice, I'm using this Simplicity pattern 4479. That's the Christine Diana Phantom of the Opera pattern. I'm just using the bodice pieces, and you can see here I've got the original pieces. I did a mock-up and I needed to make some alterations. So the front and the centre fold, I needed to extend all the pieces by at least 2 centimetres in length, because I will be having piping on the bottom as well. The strap was too thin on me. I want it to come over because I've got very narrow, very skinny shoulders. So you can see the difference there in the width of the strap that we've added. So basically they just needed a few alterations. Now the back, you can see here the original piece. Also I've got the altered strap again. I've extended the width of that. Now we worked out that we need this to look a little bit different on the other side, so the pattern has got these two the same, one's the opposite way, because there's a zip going into it, but we want to overlap it because we're doing hooks and eyes. So we don't try not to keep the centre too much off centre down your back. We went and did some practice runs, so we figured out that the left hand side, sorry that's your left, still had the same angle here, but it needed to come out by at least another 1.5 centimetres this way. So I took the original pattern piece, basically flipped it the other way around, so it's now on the left hand side, and made that made that extension here. So from that point it needs to come up further and out 1.5 centimetres that way. So we did some practice pieces here, as you can see, just to see what would happen when we've got the turn over to neaten the back edge, and that would be turned under as well, so that the theory is they meet at a nice point here when they overlap, as if we were attaching this to like onto hooks and eyes, and it's clasping onto the bodice, if you can imagine that. I know that's quite a few steps further yet to go, but that's you do have to think so far ahead when you're planning these things before you've even cut out some pieces. So I've got all my pieces ready, and I'm just going to do a final mock-up just to check that everything is still playing the game, so to speak. I've been cutting out my bodice sections. For the outer fabric is the pink candy shantung fabric that I used on the swags, and I've got some canvas here as my stiffener, my liner. Here I've got my front sections. I've cut out one of each, and I've done the same for every other bit. Now you have to remember, if you've got a good side and a bad side to your fabric, as you know, once this fabric is shiny and matte the other, I want to use the matte on the outside. So when you cut all your pieces, especially with your outer fabric, if it has got a good and a bad side, to cut out the opposite. Otherwise you'll end up with two sides the same with shiny side up or whatever. And then obviously for each section, cut out the corresponding piece in your stiffener fabric, whatever you've chosen to use. Now, the first thing I've got to do is separate all the layers, because some of them have got boning in them, and I don't want boning channels to show to the outside of my fabric. So I'm doing this kind of the old-fashioned way, which I prefer, the old-fashioned way of lining things. So I've got my canvas fabric here, and I need to start marking out boning channels. And now, if you've seen all my videos before with boning channels, or you know how this is done, then you know that obviously when you put the garment in, you're going to want to turn over the top and the bottom. The bottom of my bodice is being piped, so from the top I'm going to mark 1.5 centimetres for my turnover. I will be bias binding the edge of mine, but you might want a facing on yours. But generally I go for 1.5 centimetres from the top edge, put a mark and pencil, that's when my boning channel is going to start, because you don't want your boning going to the top, because then you won't be able to turn your seam over and neaten your edge off. And the same for the bottom as well, about 1.5 centimetre up per mark. And then obviously you need to know how wide your boning is going to be. I have some steel boning left over here that was straight, that I used for my Cinderella hoop cage. So I'm going to use this. It is approximately, I think it was 1 centimetre wide. Yeah, 1 centimetre wide. So then when you come to make a casing for your boning to go in, you need that casing to be a lot wider to allow some allowance to slip your boning into. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to mark out the widths that I need and apply a strip of bias down the front. Okay, so I've now sewn my bias binding on, and I've just given a quick check to make sure that that's going to slot into the channel like so. Obviously take account that you'll need a wider bias, and you're going to be sewing a few millimetres in from each edge to hold that down, so just remember that. So that's the front section done. Okay, so what I've done here is excuse me a second, I've got my front section here, and I've actually now mounted the two sections together, and before that I would recommend going along the bottom of your boning here and going over it quite a few times to add extra strength, because the boning will be metal. Now I completely forgot that before I mounted these two sections together that I should have really put the bone in first and then sealed the top off on the machine, and I forgot to do that, so I went a little bit ahead of myself. So if you're doing this, before you mount your two sections together, do the same what you did here while the pieces are separate, put your bone in. Otherwise, if you want to seal the top off, I mean you don't have to, but I prefer to, just in case over time it starts to want to pop out, which it shouldn't do, but things happen. They're unexplainable. But if you sewed across the top now, your sewing would go through to the outside fabric, which I don't want. So I'm just going to pick a few of my tacking stitches here and just sew across the top there like I did the bottom. Silly me. But yeah, basically you're just mounting the two sections together to treat as one piece. You have to do this very carefully. Obviously satins, the fibres shift a bit. This is not as bad as the really silky satins or silk itself, where the fibres just shift all over the place. As soon as you cut it, it will never go back to the same shape again. So what I recommend doing, as you can see here, I've cut actually a bit more around the edge, because I'll just turn it over. You can see in places where it's mostly lined up because I left a few millimetres around the edge, but even then it just about meets in certain places. This is what I mean about satins sort of changing the shape. This pink stuff isn't so bad, this shantung fabric. The stiffer fabric will hold its shape better, but just a little tip there to cut a few more millimetres around the edge, just in case the fibres shift out of place a little bit. And when you're doing it, I put weights on as I go along to hold it perfectly flat. You don't want any excess or air getting in and creating puffiness of any kind. So that's basically what I'll be doing to all my pieces. I've got my side front here. Boning channel has been sewn on the side here in this angle, and I will be putting the boning in, sewn across the top, and then mounting those sections together, and it'll be the same for the others as well. I'm now on the very back section here. I'll just quickly show you what I'm doing. Obviously you've got to make sure that your shiny side is next to the canvas and you've got your matte side facing down, and obviously you've got the opposites as I mentioned earlier. what I'm doing is I'm just lining this up with the pink. It doesn't matter if the pink overlaps in places because, as I said earlier, I did cut it a few millimetres over in places. So I'm just putting a weight there to hold it while I start putting some pins in to pin the edges together. So I'm just going to continue doing that all the way around, and as I go down the other side I'll just move this weight over here just to help me, just helps hold it flat so I can put a little bit of tension on it. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a thread that stands out so it's easy to spot. So I'm using this bright blue, and I'm just going to tack about 1/2 centimetre in layers together. I do a couple of stitches at the beginning, and as I go along I just move these pins out of the way. You don't want to go too far in, like 1.5 centimetres would be the turnover or seam allowance on your seams, and obviously at the top it'll be, on the strap here I'm doing, will be 1.5 centimetres, so you don't want to tack on that line. And you don't want to pin and tack too far in because that creates little pinholes. So 1/2 centimetre in from the top of the edge, taking the pins out as you go, and just carry on doing this all the way around. For the centre front I wanted to make the piece stand out, so from the Fancy Silk store in Birmingham, UK, in the city centre, they have a 3-storey high store full of all kinds of different fabrics that you can't get elsewhere. They have this beautiful embroidered net. It was pretty pricey, as you can see. It's very delicately embroidered, it has lots of beading on it, and on the edges there seems to be a lot more, so I've decided that I'm going to use this edge here to make my centre front panel. So I'm gently just pinning it down in place, pretty much like I mounted the pink stuff onto the backing. I'm now mounting this lace onto the front and being very careful to make sure that it's totally flat again from top to bottom and left to right. Now the issue is with the beadings, obviously you're going to want to sew this on, and you need your seam allowance, which for me is 1.5 centimetres in from the edge, in which sewing over this beading could cause a bit of a problem, so it's going to involve a little bit of work. I will have to very gently unpick some of these beads because I do not want my sewing needle going over these and breaking and snapping. So that will be a slight issue, and it will take some time getting these beads off. But I just need to go around the edges and along the bottom as well, because remember you've got your turnover at the bottom and the top as well, and mine is about that centimetre around the top because I'm going to just bias bind around the top there. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just pinning it down in place nice and tight, and then I'm going to cut round it and then start removing the beads from the edges. Skipping on a bit here, I've now removed all the beads inside here very carefully, all the way around, like I said I would do, so that the doesn't damage your needle under the machine. And I've also trimmed it down so that it now all the edges line up. I might just run a quick sewn. I don't really like to do this, but I really don't want this to move, and tacking's okay, but I think I might just run a sewing machine, stitch around the top and across the tops here, just to be extra sure it's not going to move. But apart from that, I'm pretty happy with that. Looks good. So on to the next part. I'm now working on the back sections, but as this piece of fabric, this embroidery fabric, was so expensive, I thought I would really like to use some of it at least elsewhere, and I'm going to use it on the back panels so it complements the front. Now it has a bit of a repetitive pattern, but it has some flowers going one way and then another. So what I've tried to do, after probably 20 minutes of wrestling with this, trying to find out what will look best, is I'm having this pattern here with these flowers going in that way across the strap, and then here the pattern reverses on this side, so then that leaf will be going that way, if that makes sense. And I've tried to line it up in the same position on the strap as this side, so I'll have sort of two opposites going on in a way. So right now I'm just doing the same as I did for the front. I'm just pinning this in place. I'm going to cut a bit more around it than I need, because obviously due to fine fabric shifting like I explained earlier. So I'm just going ahead now, pinning that down, then pinning the other section down where I've got it placed on the pattern, and I'll just cut around it. And that's the plan at this point.
We're going to use an adjustable zipper foot. These are made for all types of machine, not just this specific one. The one that comes with this machine is like this, but it's standing too proud and it will keep hitting the beads on the material. So we put on a universal zipper foot, so that this orange wheel at the back, you can undo that and you can actually move the zipper foot to left or to right. We want it over on the right hand side, so where you've got it, where it is where you need it, you just tighten up the back wheel, and we're now using this type of side of the zipper foot.
I've now sewn on the back lace onto the back sections either side, and here was a bit empty, so I cut out a couple of appliques left from the lace and I hand sewed that on just to fill in the gap, and I did the same this side just so it doesn't make it look so empty. And all the pieces at this point are now sewn together. Next thing I want to do is a facing for the back to neaten it off. For the facing, basically cut out the same shape that you've got here. Obviously again, make sure that you've got the same side fabrics together, because like I said earlier, this has got a shiny side and a matte, so you want to make sure that, sorry, I'll get it right in a minute, there you go, there's a shiny side up, so you've got matte side to matte side. And basically a facing is just to neaten things off, so I've cut it to the same sort of shape as a piece, except I don't really need it to go this far in. I might cut it down a little bit more yet, because I think it's still a bit too wide, but as long as you've still got something there to turn in so that it makes a nice neat edge. And the same with the other side, cut a similar piece. Again, I think I've made these too wide, but I prefer to be cautious, and it can always be cut down, so I might end up just cutting that much off, so I've got like that much left. The next step to do is to turn in the very end edge that you'll end up catch stitching to the back liner on your bodice. So this will be the side, these are the lines that you'll be sewing your facing onto, so that'll be your seam, and this is your turnover. Make sure that you do the turnover on the bad side of the fabric, so the good side that you can have facing up should look like that. Now I've cut out my facings, the next thing to do is to tidy the back up, because obviously it's not quite even, and I did make the lace slightly wider than it needed to be, just in case something did happen and I lost a bit of the width of it. So I did that more as a precaution thing from experience. So I'm just going to cut that neck down to match the edge and along here and here, so it all lines up. You can see I've pinned it in place. It's all ready to go, so I'll just do that now. The next thing to do is to actually just sew the facing on this right hand side here as it appears on the table. I've got the right hand facing and I've sewn 1.5 centimetres for my seam. Then over here to the left hand side I've done a much wider seam, and that's 2 centimetres right to the point. I've now gone ahead and taken all the tacking out of my seams, all that blue tacking I had in. I've left some around the top edges and some of it around the bottom edges. And the next thing I'm going to do is give it a good iron, and I'm also going to press my seams as well. Just before we iron it though, we need to clip a couple of curves on the seams that have curves, without going through the stitching line. So you literally only need a couple of clips. And then we're going to come round to the front here. Obviously the front has got a bit more of a curve. And do that for all the other curves as well, just a couple of snips in places. Next I'm going to be sewing on my boning channels. Now I need to do them on both back seams, the side seam and both front seams. I'm using this 7mm wide spiral steel boning because of the curves. I might be able to just put straights down the side, but I can just use this anyway, it doesn't matter. As you see, the spiral stuff is good because it bends around the curves. Also bends forwards and backwards, so yeah, and I'm just marking on it where I want to put it, because obviously I don't want it too near the top because you've got to turn the seam later, and you don't want it near the bottom because you've got to turn and neaten that edge. So I'm working a couple of centimetres in because it's on the top, and then I will be sewing on some bias binding. I might go for the blue again because I think it's a bit wider than this, but I'm just going to try it, but if not I'll go for back to the blue bias and sew that on the seams like so, so I can slot me boning back in. After sewing on my facings to the edges, I've now gone round the top edges and lined the edges up properly, making sure that they're all neat and the edges are nice and neat, and then I put some extra tacking in around the edges just so it helps hold all those layers together. The next thing to do on the bodice is to turn the facings over that you just previously sewed on, so that needs turning to the inside like so, and I've actually just ironed the seam flat open as well to help me with that. So that's the first end I'm doing, and then I'll do the same with the back end. Okay, so you can see I've got the good side facing out here, got my seam on the inside there for my facing, so I'm literally just going to pull that over, so I've got a nice neat seam there, and then I'm just going to put a pin in place just to hold that there. There we go, and then I will do that all the way along to the bottom, and then afterwards I might just give it another press with the iron. like so, so that becomes neat there. That's then neat that side, and then I will be tacking that down, and I'll show you that in a moment after I've turned all the edges on both ends. Okay, so right, the next thing to do is I've pinned that all down in place, and I'm just going to hide my knot in my thread here underneath. And then I'm going to take, and now you'll see me do this on waistbands a lot, because if I sewed down there now, that sewing line is going to go right through to the outside of the fabric and look pretty ugly. So I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way, and I just take a bit of the cream coloured liner without going through, because you don't want to go through like that. You just want to try and pick up a little bit of the liner and some of the pink from the facing and catch it down. I did quite a few stitches to start with, like you would do on the machine, so that it gives it a bit of extra strength. I also do this at the end, just to really make sure. And every now and then when you'll see me catch stitching, I might do an extra couple every few stitches, just to make it stronger. So I've done that quite a few times now, so I'll pick up a little bit of the liner and a bit of the pink, like so, and then just move on a little bit of the liner, bit of the pink, yeah, just trying to do it barely on the edge. And you'll do that all the way right down to the bottom, making sure, obviously the pins help keep it tight, but make sure that you check that your facing isn't rolling forward to the outside, and that looks pretty good. So I do check that halfway along just to double it and make sure that I've pulled that liner strong enough. So yep, just carry on all the way to the bottom and then just finish off like you did at the top. The next thing to do is to sew your shoulder seams together. Before I sewed, I actually tried it on inside out, and Mum pinned it exactly where it meets my shoulder and where it feels comfortable, so I know exactly where I've got to sew. You can see here that's quite a deep seam, it's about 2 centimetres. That's because, just to be careful, and from experience, I've had bad things happen sometimes, I added a bit more length onto the shoulder seam by a few millimetres, just in case at this point I didn't quite add enough on there. I knew it was going to be alright, but it was just a precaution thing, so I will be trimming a little bit of that back and neatening it off, and obviously do the same for the other shoulder seam. And if you like, retry it on, just make sure it's okay. So next we'll be going on to putting the bias binding onto the edge to neaten the whole top edge off of my bodice.